Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. Today is going to be the 3 Count Commentaries Q&A for May 2022. So let's get into it. Let's get right into it. All right. The TLD. I believe Lollipop by Lil Wayne influenced and ruined hip-hop and rap music. My question is, what match or match type do you think had a significant negative effect on wrestling? All right, so for starters, I think Lil Wayne's Lollipop, it was just a weird song. I wouldn't say it was the song that I think influenced and ruined hip hop music. I think it was going on the down slope before that. I think that when we started having a lot of music that was about things other than smoking weed, we were kind of going down the wrong track. Like all years before that, there was all that lean stuff and the chopped and screwed. And I'm not saying that chopped and screwed ruined rap. I'm just saying that the content that these guys were making, where it became just so cool to be super stoned. I'm talking stoned out of your gourd, not so much as high and writing songs or whatever. Like Scarface was on, I was about to say crack. He was doing cocaine when he wrote one of his albums. I think I want to say it's Untouchable. But I don't think that album at all mentioned him doing cocaine. The Hot Boys used to, do heroin when they were snorting heroin during their highest heights and their peaks in music. There were some references there, but it wasn't a lot. Now, Lollipop was a sexual song, but it wasn't about, people doing drugs and alcohol, which I think is the difference now. Is all music now is, people popping pills and, depression and all that kind of stuff that comes with, the drug culture. And I think that's like a big problem. But to get to your wrestling question, there was one match in particular that I think has influenced the indie style a lot. That would be Jerry Lynn versus Rob Van Dam, the first match. I forget what event it's from. But that style of Let Epic match, like there was always Let Epic match that had already occurred, which is the WWE dramatic style of stop and stare, let the crowd build by staring at each other and stuff like that. But Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn, they influenced the highly choreographed fight scene aspect where, Rob Van Dam swings the chair, Jerry Lynn ducks, Jerry Lynn throws a punch or whatever, Rob Van Dam ducks, they do some do-si-do, and next thing you know, Jerry Lynn is leg dropping Rob Van Dam on the chair, and they of course separate so Jerry Lynn can celebrate and Rob Van Dam can sell a little bit, and they jump over the top rope. Very little selling, a lot of choreographed spots, a lot of high flying. That stuff led to, it was the grandfather for Ricochet and Will Ospreay, which I think became sort of the taking off point. And there was a lot of stuff like the Motor City Machine Guns and the Young Bucks, which kind of left tag team wrestling in the dust because it became not about the psychology of four guys, but how many spots can we do in one match? How many, double team moves can we string together without any selling? And it just kind of started building from there. And as people took out the mattering of moves, where moves didn't matter anymore, you just do a lot of them, wrestling kind of has started to go downhill, and it became more about, flipping Canadian destroyers than anything else. And that's not what wrestling is supposed to be. That sucks. The TOD has another question. Would you consider Vince McMahon as the greatest pro wrestler ever? He was a wrestler. Every sold out event, every special WWE moment for 40 years was part because of him. And he is the most talked about person in pro wrestling ever. I wouldn't consider Vince McMahon the greatest pro wrestler ever. He is a great pro wrestler, though. I'm talking promo skills, the ability to draw heat. Match quality is in the toilet because he is not a athletic guy. He was basically a bodybuilder. If you take a bodybuilder and put him in the wrestling ring and aged him 40 years, that's Vince McMahon. If you was to take like superstar Billy Graham and age him up 40 years, and put him in the wrestling ring, that would be the equivalent of Vince, you know, except for Vince is not as poetic as like superstar Billy Graham, not as colorful. But Vince knew his persona better than pretty much anybody other than really, really high level performers. I would put Vince as, if he were not the promoter and was just a wrestler, he still would be one of the better wrestlers ever and still would have been very successful. But the difference would have been he probably wouldn't even gotten in that position if he wasn't the promoter, because physically he couldn't really do the moves. He wasn't fluid, you know. He kind of took a brawler's perspective on the wrestling thing. And then even the brawling part was barely noticeable. But I love Vince as the battling boss. You know, that was great. And it reminded me a lot of like Final Fight or something like that, where sometimes those corporate executives would take their suits off and get out there and fight people. Like it was fun. It was incredibly fun. But he never would have gotten anywhere if he wasn't the promoter already. Because even though he was a great promo, you know, he never would have gotten that so far in the business if he wasn't for, you know, him putting himself in that position. Because as far as matches were concerned, he was not good at them. Reality has 5 questions. Okay. You spoke before about how The Rock was never one of your favorites during his run. Since he's one of mine, I would love to hear you go into deeper detail on your issues with The Rock character-wise. Was it more on his character or his promo style? I actually don't mind The Rock as a character. You know, The Rock as a character is like this uber confident, almost Muhammad Ali style character. He can work heel and babyface the exact same way. But my issue with The Rock was that he created a shtick, you know, and I hated that. To me, every time I go back to The Rock, it's The Rock cutting down his opponent, absolutely burying guys, which is, to me, you know, the opposite of what wrestling should be. Like, The Rock's strongest points is when he was able to, when he did the stuff with Steve Austin, because he took Steve Austin seriously. He never tried to bury Steve Austin. But The Rock would always try to bury like Billy Gunn or The Undertaker or Kane or somebody else. Like, he was really good, like very entertaining, incredibly entertaining. But the content of his promos often absolutely buried his opponents. And it put him over so much that it made his opponents seem like they were, you know, nothing, that they were, you know, being mocked almost endlessly. And The Rock lost a lot, which is, you know, something that people kind of overlook as him as a top guy. If you look at the top guy, I think The Rock lost more than anybody. When it comes to being a top guy and getting pinned, I think The Rock lost a lot. But it was mostly because The Rock could talk himself back over and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But my issue with the promo style, and that, you know, mostly people were not allowed to cut down The Rock. You know, The Rock would get an inordinate amount of time to really just destroy guys, and could really, like, Billy Gunn wasn't worth shit anyway. I mean, just being honest, as a solo act, he wasn't worth that much. But The Rock made him just seem like he was less than anything. And it wasn't like, you know, if you're a top guy, you can work with a non-top guy and make them. You know, Flair did that forever. You know, Steve Austin never really tried to do that, for the record. He avoided that at any and all costs. But John Cena did it a lot. You know, Hogan did it a little bit. You know, you could take a guy who is not necessarily a top guy, and if you take them seriously and you treat them seriously, the fans will take them seriously and you can at least draw some money. But The Rock had this aspect of his character where he was just, I mean, the guy, you know, buried Kane, you know, making fun of the voice box and the eye rolling of The Undertaker and all that kind of stuff. And yes, it was funny, but at the same time, but at what cost? You know, when people didn't take those characters seriously, it's like, at what cost? So you have to ask the question, did The Rock really build these matches as much as they were fodder for his comedy routine? You know, like, it was fun when he was doing stuff with the Hurricane and doing stuff with Sean Stasiak, because most other guys wouldn't even been bothered with those dudes. You know, like, Cena doesn't really do comedy stuff with the little guys anymore. And that's the kind of thing that make the universe feel complete. And that's the one thing that I did like about The Rock, is that he would do a long running thing with the Hurricane and make it entertaining and show you that the Hurricane is funny too. And he has personality. he could do something with Shawn Stasiak and show that Shawn Stasiak has something, or at least is a body that, has something that people can remember in the future. Guys these days, top guys these days, kind of avoid that thing. They don't really get involved with guys on the undercard. And so I missed that aspect of The Rock. But him burying other top guys is kind of like, I'm just like, ugh. So let's get to the second question. What were your favorite moments from the Attitude Era? Well, when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Mankind. I thought Mankind was very cool because Undertaker was my favorite wrestler when I was a kid, next to Shawn Michaels. And when he won the title, that blew my mind. And I'm talking Mankind, because I thought it was never going to happen. Now, I wasn't in terms of fully into the analysis of the character. Like today, looking back on it, it's one of the best stories ever written in wrestling. But as a kid, I was just happy that one of my favorite wrestlers won the title. I thought that was very cool. So that would be one, was Mankind winning the belt. Another one of my favorite Attitude Era moments would probably be the DX parodies. The DX parodying the Nation, and the Nation parodying on DX too. I thought both of those were pretty funny. I wasn't upset by the blackface thing or them making fun of D'Lo Brown or anything like that. I didn't really trip about any of that stuff, really, because I didn't think to be offended by it. That's the thing. Like, if somebody has to tell you to be offended, you weren't offended. I wasn't offended by it because I didn't know anything about it. I was a big fan of the Triple H Rock, their storyline, their long-running, years-running storyline. Like, those two dudes basically grew up together. And they basically have, like, this relationship where, they were on the undercard together, the Intercontinental Championship, side of the undercard. Back when that title didn't really mean that much. It was like 97, maybe, when they just thrown that thing in the air and it didn't really matter who the champion was. So you saw them come up together in the DX and the Nation. And then they came up more as they, The Rock was the catalyst for Triple H to turn heel and become the Game. And then they grew up together again as main event guys. And then as sort of legends, they were still doing stuff together. So I always liked the relationship between Triple H and The Rock and that DX Nation thing that was going on. I just thought that was just a lot of fun, and watching all of those guys bloom. The Ahmed Johnson and Farouk storyline, I talked a lot about how much I think that storyline was very underrated. And it wasn't really a story in terms of these two guys were cutting hellacious great promos on one another. It was just two dudes beating the shit out of each other for a shoot because they didn't like each other. And I thought it was great. As a kid, I thought it was great. Especially when Ahmed Johnson came back at the Royal Rumble with that 2x4 and hit Farouk with it. I thought that shit was hilarious. Because it was like, I think it was maybe one of the first things of its kind I've ever seen. So there was a lot of Attitude Era moments. Kane's debut, that, of course, that was a top level thing right there. All right, so his third question. Do you agree with Cornett on his idea of the Attitude Era actually being bad for pro wrestling in the long run and ended up exposing the business? Yes, I think it exposed the business quite a bit. I think it was bad for wrestling in the long run because wrestling was once again a fad. Whenever wrestling becomes a fad, it goes from being the most popular thing on TV, the most popular thing for kids, to slinking back down in the depths. And then everybody starts talking about how the business is cyclical and all that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, it was a fad for a while. And the Attitude Era was a fad. And ultimately, it was probably the biggest fad in pro wrestling history, in terms of mainstream. And now people expect that stuff to still be the case today. And that's really the poisonous aspect of the Attitude Era, is everybody thinks that was supposed to last forever. And it's like, how can it? Explain to me how the Attitude Era could last forever. Because everything that was hip and cool from the 90s is played out today. South Park is still on TV. South Park was revolutionary at its time. The children cursing and, the children doing all kind of, vulgar stuff. There was sexual stuff on the show. South Park, you can go back and watch the Attitude Era. There's a lot of South Park characters on the Attitude Era shows and people drawing Stone Cold Steve Austin in South Park style. here in 2022, South Park is still a popular show, but it's nowhere near the public consciousness that it was in 99, 2000. It's not the same show anymore. You know, it's even if the content of the show changed a little bit, which it has, it simply does not resonate with the audience today like it did then. And it's still a popular show, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near the same. It was revolutionary for its time, but that was 20 years ago, you know? So it's not revolutionary for its time anymore. And, you know, WWE, what they were doing was revolutionary for its time, but that was 20 years ago. If they were even to do a lot of the stuff they did today, it would just be a rehash of stuff that they've already done. So if you wanted to do a Stone Cold Steve Austin, everybody would just say, oh, you're doing a fake Stone Cold Steve Austin. You can't do it again. So it's not the same. You know, you can't do it again. You can't do Austin and McMahon again. You just can't do it again. You can't do it twice. So it's reality's fourth question. Is there any wrestling you wish you experienced live when you weren't watching wrestling for a period of time? I wish I could have been watching the SmackDown 6 live because I heard a lot about it through the internet, but I wasn't really watching. And I didn't see any reason for me to watch it because I looked at the list of these guys and I was like, okay, I like Rey Mysterio. I like Kurt Angle. I like Chris Benoit. I like Eddie Guerrero. But you know, I'm just kind of like, I'm not driven. Like, there's nothing I'm reading on the line as I was reading dirt sheets or whatever that made me decide, oh, I got to see that. That didn't happen until WrestleMania 21 when I just kind of like, man, I got to see that. You know, Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle, I got to see that. There was nothing in that because for me, and I still have these conversations sometimes with people who are Attitude Era wrestling fans, and they kind of lapsed, but they keep their finger on the pulse. Sometimes they may, you know, they may see me watching Raw or something like that, me watching something, and they like, oh, you still watch this? Yada yada yada. Oh, that's Edge. And I'm like, yeah, that's Edge. Like, oh, the tag team guy. They remember him from TLC. They don't remember anything else that he did. So that's kind of how I was when I was on the outs of wrestling. I was like, oh, Edge is tag team guy. You know, that's why I heard Bradshaw won the title. I was like, that's ridiculous. He's a tag team guy. You know, it's 100% you got to be there. You have to be on the ground floor watching because that's how you really get into it. Because sometimes a mainstay will get hot out of nowhere and they're getting a lot of TV time and you're like, he was nothing when I was on TV. It was like when I was watching. So it was like the same thing where if you were watching wrestling in 1995 and you saw Hunter Hearst Helmsley in the Ringmaster, and then you came back 5 years later and those two guys are the top two guys in the company. Now they're going to look completely and totally different. You know, it's not going to be Hunter Hearst Helmsley, you know, the Connecticut Blue Blood and the Ringmaster with Ted DiBiase. You missed the entire forming of how they got in this position. But if you walk up to somebody and tell them in 2000, oh yeah, Steve Austin and Hunter Hearst Helmsley are going to be in the main event of this pay-per-view, they're going to be like, Hunter Hearst Helmsley? The guy the Ultimate Warrior buried? I don't want to see that guy. It's like you don't get it. You've lapsed and you can't get back in the game. So SmackDown 6 is definitely one of those things I wish I could have seen live and really experienced it. Because when I watched Survivor Series, I went back to Survivor Series 2002 or was it 2003? One of them where they had the 6-man tag. Not the 6-man tag, but the triple threat tag team match. It was Los Guerreros, Angle and Benoit, Edge and Rey Mysterio. That match was fantastic. And I didn't know they had all of these matches, you know, going into it. And I was like, oh shit. And I had to go back and kind of, you know, weed my way through that. So I wish I sat down and watched SmackDown during that time. His fifth question: what were some of the favorite moments from The Rock that you did enjoy? I always liked The Rock. The Rock and Sock connection for me was something that I found to be fun. Even though it changed, Mankind's character had changed already anyway. But even though it turned Foley into almost 100% a comedy act and a secondary bit player, the ugly friend of The Rock, but it brought out so many funny moments that I do I am glad that it happened. I just hate that we never got a turn where Foley beat the shit out of The Rock for making fun of him as he was trying to be The Rock's friend and, you know, trying to be accepted by The Rock, and The Rock kept rejecting him, saying that they're not friends. That, you know, Foley would have snapped and beat him like Shovel or something like that. I think that would have been great storytelling to elevate Mankind even further. But they did something that I think was maybe even better, and that had The Rock accept him eventually, which is also a very good ending to that story. That's also a very good ending to that story. But I always liked The Rock working with Mick Foley. I thought that was fantastic. Foley is so giving, and he was unburiable. So no matter how bad The Rock talked about him, you know, people were sympathetic to Foley because of the portrayal of his character, and they knew him. So The Rock could bury him all day, and he would either turn the phrase around because he was witty, or you knew he could take an ass whooping, and The Rock was, you know, was going to have a fight on his hands. So I always enjoyed that stuff. I already talked about the Rock and Triple H stuff that I really enjoyed. Of course, The Rock and Austin stuff. I never thought The Rock and Undertaker had great matches. I never really liked any of The Rock Undertaker matches. I think their King of the Ring match is probably the only match I thought was okay, and I didn't even think that was great. You know, Undertaker wasn't having really good matches at the time. We being honest, he was kind of overweight and stuff, so he was kind of over the hill. And I think that was another reason why I didn't really care for the Attitude Era, because I felt like there was no Shawn, there was no Brett. Those were the guys that were my guys from the New Generation era, and Undertaker was either sidelined with injuries during that time, or he was having stupid storylines and bad matches, or matches that I didn't think was of the caliber that he could have, even at the time, you know? So I know his match quality increased greatly in the 2000s. Like, he literally got much, much better. But for me, it's like his matches with Stone Cold, his matches with The Rock were not the matches he could have had. And though that's really a shame for me. Even the SummerSlam 98 match with Stone Cold Steve Austin, I thought that was probably the best match that Undertaker and Stone Cold had. But that's one of the reasons why I don't like the Attitude Era is Undertaker was not good. And there was like, you know, but we were talking about The Rock, and I said the stuff already. All right, D-Mac. What do you think of Tony Khan's purchase of Ring of Honor will turn into? As it stands now, the belts exist for a company that doesn't really exist in a tangible standalone form. There doesn't seem to be a viable TV host for ROH, so I wonder if they create a YouTube exclusive web show or shop it to Fight TV. Would you revive the brand? If so, how would you go about it? I think Tony Khan essentially already said that he will revive the brand and that he's going to do a television show. The situation is probably going to be a Fight TV or maybe Bleacher Report or something like that is going to host the show. There's going to be a lot of the thing here is people care about branding, and AEW did a really good job on their branding. So, but Ring of Honor isn't a strong brand. It's just not. Even if you was to say, it's a offshoot of AEW. If you wanted to, you know, like that, how would you promote that to a company? You know, hey, I got this company that's, you know, it has 20 years of history, but it's defunct. You know, who's going to be the stars on this show? And then they see like, okay, you're the owner of AEW. Hey, we love CM Punk. Is he going to be on there? And you kind of be like, sometimes, you know, Danielson's going to be on there. The Yes guy, oh, he's going to be on there sometimes. But it's mostly going to be our up and coming stars and some of the originals from that brand. They're going to be like, look, the biggest star that I know so far is going to be involved in Ring of Honor is Samoa Joe. And you're really running a high risk of people knowing who Samoa Joe is. Not because, oh, his WWE stuff wasn't that fantastic, but he wasn't a huge star in WWE. He didn't cross over into the mainstream. So who are you going to sell them as the stars of Ring of Honor to get them to host your show? That's going to be the problem. You know, network executives, you can at least say, you know, Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, these guys are former WWE champions, yada, yada, yada. They're top guys. Look at, you know, merchandise sales, yada, yada. Samoa Joe, what do you go to an executive with? People like him. Yeah, people love him. But was he ever the tippy top guy? Not even in TNA. When he was on that undefeated streak for a long time, did he become the tippy top guy? So that would be my question is, how is he going to sell the show? But I think he's already said he wants to make a separate brand. And it's going to end up being a developmental brand. And maybe he'll do it through YouTube. Maybe he'll do it through Fight TV, like you said. But I think it'll have to be something like that. I don't think there's any other way to do it, to be quite honest. I don't think TBS or TNT is going to give him, unless he, is willing to pay for some stuff, which, he might be. He's Tony Khan. He's got money. D-Mac's second question. What childhood wrestling memory would you have loved to experience live? I got to go back to the Mankind winning the title. I wish I was in the building when that happened. I really do. I wish I was in the building, because watching Raw, it was a fun time, but I wish I was in the building when that happened. That would have been tremendous. That's just something there's very few times where I felt like, man, I should have been in the building when that occurred. But that was one of the times where I felt like I should have been in the building. Let's see. Maul, would you ever consider writing for an independent wrestling show? If they asked and I was familiar with the talent, I would consider it. The biggest issue is going to be being familiar with the talent and the talent being receptive to ideas from people who don't work in the business. D-Mac has another question. For what it's worth, Cody had his own reality series with Brandy and was on that game show. At the minimum, it was a way to get the AEW name out there, well, mainly his name. Outside of Jericho, what other wrestlers on the roster could you see in non-wrestling ventures? I think Swerve and Jade could have the kind of appeal if you found the right forum, but I'm not really sure. I think that Swerve wants to have that kind of forum in terms of being able to spread his wrestling into rap music. I don't know how successful he is. Just like I know that the Butcher is a musician. I don't know what their level of success is. Like it's hard to tell in the Spotify generation and all that kind of stuff. It's hard to tell, who's really successful and who's really doing this and who's not. But I definitely could see some people with some crossover potential. And I think Jade Cargill has some crossover potential. In a reality TV kind of way, or in a way of, can she garner mainstream attention in some way? I think so. What do I see her doing is another question. I think that people are going to be enamored with the look. And if she was to do something in the fitness space, let's say that somebody needs the host of like American Gladiators or something like that, or a style show, Titan Games or something like that, I think she could probably do something like that. I think she could probably do like something, in the fitness and sports type of vein, where she could probably really, bring some mainstream attention. It would just be finding the right vehicle. Now, as far as Swerve and rap is concerned, it's hard to tell, because that rap stuff is hard to it's hard to break into, because it's a young man's game, and even though he's a young man, I think he's in his 30s or in his late 20s, and it's very, very rare that a late 20s, early 30s rapper really hits and gets on. It's very rare. D-Mac has another question. Any chance you do Audible light readings for your novels or excerpts on your channel? I considered doing that. I considered doing a lot of audio-based things with the stories. Maybe doing a separate channel where we do readings. And the thing is, I tend to write a lot, so it would have to be done in chapters rather than as a single sitting, and that would be a pain in the ass, for a lot of people, because they would be like, okay, I'm going to do chapter 1 today, and compiling it into a compendium maybe after I do the chapters would probably be the best way to do it. But I think I would want somebody else to read them. Maybe do voice acting to go along with it. Like find some female voices to do the female characters and male voices to do the male characters would be fun. That's like the old radio shows. It's kind of like that. I do have that in mind, and I did have that in mind at some point. All right, next question, Mr. VXG. I never knew Detroit pizza was a thing until a few months ago. Mongo, what is your favorite style of pizza? Detroit, Chicago, or traditional style? Do you think people who put pineapple on their pizza are wired? Uh, I never had pineapple on pizza. I never understood why you would put that, that's a strange fruit to put on pizza. Without trying it, I can't say whether it's good or not. I love pineapples, by the way. I just don't know if pineapple on pizza is the smartest thing in the world. Now, Detroit style pizza, for a lot of people don't know, is the square style pizza. It's very good. If you get the right Detroit style pizza, it's fantastic. Chicago style is deep dish. A lot of it is it's almost like a calzone where they'll stack it on top of each other, or it's folded on top of each other. Traditional is what you will get from a restaurant, but then there's the New York style, which is like the big floppy slices. Usually you only need like one of those because you can't really get a plate to cover it. I've tried a lot of different types of pizza. It's very the Chicago style is very good. And I love it if you are into like the meat aspect of pizza, but it's a lot of fucking bread. It's a lot of bread. It is a lot of bread. New York, I think, is good, but I'm not a big floppy slice kind of guy. And of course, I grew up in the Detroit style, deep dish, square. So I would say probably Chicago. I think Chicago style is very good. But maybe it's also that I've had so much Detroit style pizza that when I do have a Chicago, I feel like it's better. So I'm not going to say Chicago absolutely, but that's usually like the style I go for. But I love me a good Detroit style pizza with the buttered crust. It's just fantastic. Alto Johnson, do you read any of Neil Adams' comics? What are the two of them the best ever? I actually never read. I've seen his covers more than I've actually read the comics. Neil Adams, again, people, I think I'm a comic guy, but not a comic book guy. And I'm not let's go back to the 70s kind of comic book guy. I know of it, but I haven't read it. Like, I've seen a lot of Neil Adams covers for the comic books that he's drawn. I've seen quite a few comic books that he's drawn, but I don't think I've actually ever read them. His second question, do you think Natalia and Mandy Rhodes would be perfect coaches in NXT? Like Natalia as the mechanic and Mandy as the character development, promo, and charisma. I think because Mandy's her charisma and her character is herself, she probably wouldn't be a very good coach, because so much of what she does is just natural to her to do, and she didn't have to learn it. That's the thing. Like, somebody who would be a good character trainer is somebody who had to learn the mechanics of working a character. Since Mandy Rose just does what Mandy Rose does, or what Mandy Rose would do, she knows what she would do. She knows what she would wear because her character is herself. So that would be very different for her, because she would just be like, I don't know what to do. Like Randy Orton said, he wouldn't be a very good coach. It's like, I think some people know that they probably wouldn't be very good coaches because so much of what they did was just themselves. But I think somebody like Kane or somebody like Undertaker would be great character coaches because they had to go so far beyond what they actually did and who they actually were. And that's where you get into almost like method acting, like where you can almost dissolve your entire personal persona into the character and you see very little of the actual person. That would be great character stuff. Those guys would probably be great, like, character promos type of guys. The Hurricane is another one. It's so far away from what he was actually doing that I think you probably could learn a lot from working with the Hurricane. But I don't think Mandy Rose is probably a good character, because she doesn't stray too far from who she is. Natalia as a work rate coach, absolutely. I think they're probably pretty much training her to do that now. As far as she gets up there in age, I think she's probably going to be a top coach at some point in the future. Darren Miles, are we ever going to get a cultural vandalism part 3 and 4? All right, so I did these videos, these sort of not really political videos, they're more like culture war videos called cultural vandalism. The concept is that, you know, you'll have these pillars of cultural communities like Superman. And then people will get their little spray can, theoretical spray can, metaphorical spray can rather, and they would spray like, you know, Black Lives Matter on Superman. And their way of doing that would be turn Superman into some poster boy for LGBT or Black Lives Matter or climate change or whatever the hell. So I did 2 videos. I did the fiction and the nonfiction videos. And then from there, I just basically folded singular aspects into this. So it probably won't be a 3 and 4 as much as I will be doing more in the same vein. Like I talked about Icon and Rocket, the 2 characters from Milestone Comics who were not, you know, Rocket was kind of woke for the time in the 90s. But Icon was a black, conservative, Republican style character. And now he's a Black Lives Matter activist type. And I did a video on it. And I talked about the difference between when Dwayne McDuffie wrote the character and when Reginald Hudlin wrote the character. So that's probably what's going to be the cultural vandalism, how that sort of topic or branding is going to continue. I think I'm going to do it. I think I created a playlist for it. Superman, they turned Superman gay. It's a perfect cultural vandalism subject for me to talk about. Them turning Robin gay. Them wanting to turn the Punisher gay. All that kind of stuff is perfect fodder for cultural vandalism. And, you know, I will discuss those things when they pop up. And I usually put them in their kind of extra content. So there probably won't be a 3 and 4, but there will be sort of that branding onto other things, specific subjects as we go forward in and the next one is going to be on female empowerment. And I've already got, you know, an idea written, and it's going to be on the desire to switch male characters to female characters, and that female characters and male characters are not the same. That video might actually come out before this one. So, you know, I'm really looking at, you know what, it probably won't, but that's going to be the next subject. It's going to be, you know, because I talked about that, I think in the fiction? I think I talked about it in both the fiction and the nonfiction cultural vandalism is how they're using, you know, they are, you know, turning the men into buffoons and the women are the strong, independent ones that don't need no man and everything. But men and women are different, and they are looking for different things and different types of validation. But we'll get around to that eventually. All right, so Synonymous TV. 1, how would you book Tommaso Ciampa on the main roster? I think I would book him the same way he was booked in NXT. You know, a title-obsessed, grizzled vet, you know, a human buzzsaw, guy who would do anything to, you know, achieve a certain level of success. I think we will have to create a longer lasting character, because there's only so long you can buzz around the title and that be your persona or your personality. That's the thing WWE does better than most people, is they look at how you can stretch your character outside of needing a title, because so many people become irrelevant when they're not champions. So I want Tommaso Ciampa to have a persona that, you know, leads for him to be able to have great singles matches without the need for a title. And I think he was great as the gatekeeper for NXT. You know, he's talked about, you know, the young roster and how they don't appreciate anything. I think that role could have lasted for a year or 2 years. He could have probably run the rest of his contract under that role of every time a new NXT talent pops up, Tommaso Ciampa is there to kind of be the, you don't deserve to be here, you know, kind of, you know, that kind of attitude. And then you can also be very cool and, you know, him having shaken hand like he did with Braun Breaker, where eventually he's like, okay, Braun Breaker is the truth. You know, he's the guy who deserves to be here. And, you know, sparingly using that aspect of it where Champa's the guy who gives the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and the crowd is going to believe in him because they know Champa's, not a cupcake. He's going to be a pushover. So even if you win, he could lose to Grayson Waller or whatever, he can still say Grayson Waller doesn't deserve to be here. He's a chump, yada, yada, yada. And people will still believe it because even though he lost, he's probably going to lose in a way that's not going to put Grayson Waller over too much. He's not going to get in there and just get beat with his finish or anything like that. 2, how would you book the fall of the Bloodline? I think the end of the story should hang on the beginning. And what I mean by that is what created it should be the weak point. The Bloodline was created under the concept of Roman and Paul Heyman. And then the first feud was with Jey Uso. So I think that's where the first chinks in the armor should come from. The first chinks in the armor should come from probably the Usos costing Roman the title. And from there, we start to have real problems with the Bloodline. Maybe it's a thing where, the Usos going there to try to super kick somebody. Something simple. Guy, Cody, McIntyre, whoever, he ducks out of the way. They double super kick Roman. And that leads to Roman losing. Now we've got a problem. And I think that would be the best way to begin the fall of that storyline, is because now the Roman's going to be on the Usos' head again. And now we can go back to what it was before, which is Jimmy like, look, I don't need this shit. And Jay being like, man, being so conflicted. But this time, they've had their run. Roman isn't as strong as he used to be. He's actually crazier than he used to be. He's not as manipulative, or they're kind of used to his manipulations. So they're kind of, getting over it. But I definitely would begin where it is, and that is with the Usos fucking up. That's where I would have it. I would have the Usos fuck up something, and Roman gets distracted or otherwise screwed up, and they are the reason he starts to slip and fall down, because they're his backbone at the moment. 3, who do you think is the best candidate to dethrone Mandy Rhodes as NXT Women's Champion and be the next top women's babyface on the brand? They've got a couple. I thought it was Cora Jade, and then Nikita Lyons happened. So I was like, wait, now I don't think it is Nikita Lyons. So, as far as keeping the same vein, I think Nikita Lyons would be perfect to beat Mandy Rhodes. And I think she could probably learn a lot from Mandy in terms of Nikita Lyons is her whole thing is her look. She can actually perform, but her looks is what garners attention. And I think that, there could be this sort of, that rivalry can start right there is, the cattiness of the girls, Nikita Lyons thinks she's such hot shit, but, she doesn't look better than me, and Nikita Lyons said, well, look, I definitely look better than you. And that would trigger all of the people who are like, no, you can't have them talking about who looks better. I'm like, it's no different than when Rick Rude and the Ultimate Warrior did a pose down, or Steiner and Triple H did a pose down. You could do something similar to that where Mandy Rose talks about how hot she is. And then Nikita Lyons is like, you think you hot? I barely on the show. And, yada, 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 And that would be a nice way of getting at Mandy's ego. And that plays into her character. As we've seen that, Mandy's ego is very important. So I think that would be great. I think Cora Jade is a sentimental favorite. I think Roxanne is also a sentimental favorite. And I'm thinking that they probably will go with Roxanne because they're going to want to have a work rate champion at some point. So it's probably going to be Roxanne. And I'm thinking she's probably going to end up winning the breakout tournament and end up being the next women's champion, which is what I said before, is that they had her wrestle Mandy Rose and lose, but she got really close. So she's going to double back later and probably beat Mandy. They're probably going to find some way to finagle Nikita Lyons out of that tournament, which would be smart because she doesn't need to win it. In fact, they need to be trying to put her up to the main roster as soon as possible. As soon as possible. Wait a minute, what's happening here? What? Mr. VXG has another question. Wait a minute. I lost it. What was your favorite Saturday morning cartoon growing up? All right. So Saturday morning cartoons for me, was mostly I don't remember any from my childhood that I remember watching. But when I was thinking it maybe a preteen, it was a lot of like Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon before wrestling came on. But so I don't really remember Saturday morning cartoons that much. I'm struggling to remember any right now. Darren Miles has another question. How come there's no interesting stages anymore? That's a good question. I like stages. I like, different backgrounds for the events, but I'm guessing it's just expensive to lug all that stuff around. Like the big Armageddon sign. I liked Armageddon as an event. I thought it was great. But I'm pretty sure it was absolute ass to carry that damn thing around and then build it. I wish they would actually start doing that. Go back to it. It's something that people really like. And I like themed events. I like something like Armageddon where, it seemed fun. And that made the Attitude Era fun too, because you had all these different backgrounds. And it seems fun. I wish we had interesting stages, but I know that stuff is expensive to do. And they want to do these shows so often now that, there's probably just a waste of, they're so fucking cheap. I hate WWE sometimes. They're so fucking cheap. Like we need to, that's cool shit. It gets people excited for these shows and it makes the shows look special and feel special. Do that. Alto Johnson, another question. Well, he got 4 more questions. Were you a fan of Jade the Black? I have no idea who that is. 2, do you feel like doing a Forbidden Door podcast with Don Tony? If he asked me, I'm pretty sure he's never asked, but if he's asked me, I think it would be great for my show because I have so few followers. It would be great. And I would definitely do it just for that alone. It's an opportunity to, reach a wider audience who might be a little bit more mature into the things that I do. So yeah. And plus Don Tony is pretty cool. So yeah, I would do it. 3, have you ever seen BET American Gangster TV show? No. If it's a BET TV show, nah, probably not. The movie was dope. I don't know why they would make a TV show out of it since it was a biography. So I don't get it. Maybe explain it to me in the comment section what the hell that show is. 4, have you seen the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon? I've seen some of it. I think that was right after Nickelodeon bought them, wasn't it? Because I watched parts of that cartoon series, but it's like Thundercats to me, where I watched some of it, but I don't remember how much of it I actually watched. But I haven't watched the 2003 cartoon, not completely. But when I get done watching Samurai Jack all the way through again, I would definitely go watch the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. Alto Johnson, how come nobody talks about Image Comics anymore? And why have they not been part of the Marvel DC conversation? Well, the thing is, Image actually is in terms of TV and stuff like that are very successful. They had The Walking Dead, Deadly Class also came through Image, but Image is going through a lot of changes because wokeness hit Image pretty hard, and it's because a lot of that stuff is creator owned, which means that it's the creators who are making that stuff. But a lot of the biggest comic book series of the last couple of years have been from Image. Spawn has blown up again. That's an Image. They've stretched the Spawn universe. So now I'm reading Gunslinger Spawn and King Spawn when I wasn't reading Spawn comics at all 5 years ago. So, hooray. Deadly Class is very good. Black Science, both Rick Remender series are very good. I think they're both, well, Deadly Class is still going on. Black Science is actually over. Kill or Be Killed, which is Ed Brubaker series, that was very good. But there's such an eclectic group for Image that usually individual success doesn't really bleed over into the company because it's creator owned. But as far as DC and Marvel, they have that shared universe concept where everything is owned by DC and Marvel. So it's one big thing. You could have Spider-Man and Doctor Strange together, where you're not going to mix, Deadly Class and The Walking Dead, because those are two different franchises. Even though they both was printed by Image Comics, they're just two different franchises. Also, Johnson, I have another question. Why do you think Trish Stratus is not appreciated enough, like Lita, when it comes to women who want to get into the wrestling business? It's because Trish Stratus was a look. They downplay everybody who had great looks. Trish Stratus grew into being a good wrestler because she wasn't very good at first. She was, I think, a fitness model or something like that WWE brought in and taught her how to wrestle. So she's the proto Mandy Rose. And they're going to use that to push to the audience that, it's not all fat neck beards and ugly broads who want to be wrestlers. But generally speaking, when they're trying to, bring in athletes and stuff like that, Trish Stratus wasn't doing what Lita was doing. Lita was out there trying to do moonsaults and hurricanranas and all that kind of shit, being super athletic. Where Trish was doing a lot of character stuff, a lot of personality, a lot of persona, a lot of it based on how she looked. And her look was a big draw. And it's unfortunate that they've decided to run away from that. Like they always try to run away from that shit. But at the time, it's absolutely you had to be there kind of situation. And it's crazy how Trish Stratus still was able to have a pretty good match. I think she's in her 40s when she wrestled Charlotte. It was still a pretty good match. So I think people remember her as a really good wrestler, but in her prime years, they probably see Trish Stratus as mostly a body and not so much as, somebody who is a complete wrestler. DeAndre Dukes, what are some superheroes from Marvel that feel like they belong in DC and DC superheroes that belong in Marvel? I think that in some of the recent years, there are DC characters that, like, you have to understand how the two different universes are formed. So Marvel, it was always meant to be world outside your window. Or as some people will say, human beings that think they're gods. So Spider-Man, Iron Man, these are average people with superhero type of personas that are clamped upon them. DC is more like I don't want to say knockoffs of Olympic gods or whatever. You have Superman, because his powers are innate in terms of he doesn't become Superman, he just is Superman. The Flash does become the Flash, but he is the Flash, meaning his powers are active all the time, and he has to learn how to control them. Wonder Woman is Wonder Woman, literally all the time. So Batman is the one character that seems like he should be a Marvel character, because Batman is a guy in a suit. Iron Man is a guy in a suit, so it's like the darker backstory where you take some of the Punisher a little bit, and some of Iron Man, and you get Batman. So it seems like Batman would fit in the Marvel universe as a, multi-billionaire who takes up the life of fighting crime. There's a lot of Marvel characters who would do something like that. Now, as far as Marvel characters that would fit in the DC universe, Thor is probably number one. Even though I think DC has their own version of Thor. And they also have their own version of Hercules and stuff like that. It's just kind of downplayed. But Thor, of course, fits into the DC universe perfectly because, a lot of the DC characters are based on gods. Like Mercury, I think it's the Messenger. I think it's the Olympic god. That was the idea behind the Flash. And you have Apollo, which I think is the sun god, was the Archer, was the idea behind Green Arrow, which is also the Robin Hood from the English myths. It was another influence on the Green Arrow. So you have those kinds of characters in DC universe. And Marvel is more grounded, more down to earth. But the difference between the reason why Batman probably wouldn't make it is because in Marvel they try to make their personal characters, their love life, the soap opera aspect, just as important as the superhero stuff. DC did that back during like the Comics Code Authority when, they couldn't rip arms off and stuff like that. So it was like a lot of soap opera, who was Lois Lane on a date and all that kind of stuff. So, I think that aspect of it, because Batman isn't soap opera enough, even until Tom King started writing it, and then it became a soap opera in spandex. That was always the Spider-Man thing. It was all soap, and people loved soap operas. even guys. And it was basically soap opera for dudes. But there's probably a few. I think Silencer, one of the newer characters for DC, probably would fit well into Marvel. Her gimmick or story is that she's a former assassin. She was raised by Talia al Ghul, and she had retired to have a normal life. And then Talia al Ghul started messing with her normal life and brought her back into the assassin game. And she could fit in the Marvel universe. It couldn't be Talia al Ghul. It had to be somebody else. But it could be easily Shield or Hydra or somebody like that. You could have just swapped that out. But I think, and plus those characters, Sideways, Damage, they were all based on Marvel characters anyway. So that it would make sense for them to fit there. I think Black Panther probably could fit into the DC universe too. Because there's a heavily spiritual aspect to the Black Panther character, with the ancestors and the Panther gods and, Boston, all that kind of stuff. Even though they kind of butchering the boss lore, it kind of triggers the shit out of me, but it is what it is. I don't expect these people to know that kind of stuff. 2, it's been 20 years since Randy Orton's WWE debut. How do you feel about him now? I've been a fan of Randy Orton for several years. I've just felt like Randy was coasting for a long time. He has those years where he coasted. I don't think Randy went hard for 20 years. I think out of the whole 20 years that Randy has been around, he's probably gone hard for about 10 of them. And I think he's coasted for about 10. I think off and on, Randy has just been chilling. I think they let him off the hook for so much stuff, that he probably doesn't have 20 hard years in the business, but he's got 20 years. I'm really a big fan of Randy and think that he's kind of grown into a fabulous performer, especially within the last several years. He's gotten really good. 3, who do you think should have been revealed as the higher power? I'm guessing in that storyline where it was, it's me, Austin. I like that it was Vince. Because it shows how deranged Vince is. Like what could be more perfect than Vince McMahon having his own daughter kidnapped to fuck with Stone Cold Steve Austin? Like that's sad, man. That's fucked up. There's that movie Man on Fire. It's about that exact same thing. A guy has his own daughter kidnapped. And I forgot the reason why he did it, but he had his own daughter kidnapped. So it shows that people are deranged, and I like that Vince was the higher power. I wouldn't change it. 4, what's your favorite Vince McMahon match, promo, and segment of all time? My favorite Vince match is his match with Hogan. That match was so much fun. The promos leading up to it was very fun. I really wish I was watching the show at the time to see that stuff live. But so that kind of goes back to one of the earlier questions. So I really enjoyed the Vince McMahon Hulk Hogan match. The Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels match was fun too. The Vince versus God. I love that stuff. That stuff was so much fun. Him going to church and doing the Triple H stuff with the holy water. Oh, it was so blasphemous. But that's what made it fun. But my favorite scene is no doubt the McMahon family prayer, where you had pregnant Stephanie down on her knees as Vince gives a deranged, orange-skinned Vince McMahon, who is absolutely jacked to the gills, is giving this horrible prayer. I think it is the singularly most Vince McMahon stuff possible. That and Do-Rag Vince. Do-Rag Vince, when he was the ECW champion, was fantastic. He is so fucking entertaining. He's very underrated. His 5th question. What's your favorite video game that you loved playing growing up? Final Fantasy VII. That was my favorite video game when I was a kid. I also was very partial to Street Fighter 2. There was no edition that I didn't like. I didn't like Turbo because I didn't like playing fast. But Street Fighter 2 was one of my favorites. Final Fantasy 7 was one of my favorites. I loved Zelda. Not just Ocarina of Time. I loved that too. So I loved all 3 of those. Big fan of the Zelda franchise. Even though I did fall off after Nintendo 64 because I really didn't get back into Nintendo. 6, How do you see the world in the next 10 years? All right, let's try that again because I started having like a dry cough. So I think in the next 10 years, the world will, you know, the rubber band is going to eventually break on a lot of the things that occurred. But I think what will end up happening is some people will actually smarten up to how bad they let things get, especially during the pandemic. It's like the housing crash in 2008, where, maybe 10 years later or something like that, people was just talking about how terrible it was. And it was one of those big financial, absolutely destroying things that ruined the economy and ruined the lives of hundreds of thousands and millions of people and put people who would otherwise be middle class into the poverty bin or made them wealthy. The pandemic is going to be that in 10 years. People are going to look at it and say, if it wasn't for this goddamn pandemic, my mom or dad or whatever never would have lost their house, never would have lost their business, yada, yada, yada. And those people may smarten up everybody else and be able to say, this is ruined our lives. While some other people are going to be like, oh, but it saved our lives. Or some people are going to say, well, my mom and dad launched their business during the pandemic. And some people did. A lot of people launched businesses during the pandemic. And that's going to be the financial thing of our time in 10 years. It's going to be the pandemic. Like, it sucks today, for sure, with the inflation and, the loss of liberty and all that kind of stuff. But in 10 years, there's going to be people who were children during the pandemic. And they're going to be, 15, 16, 17, or something, or hell, they may be 27, 28. And they're going to look back on this and be able to say, that pandemic fucked us. It ruined us, and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all those guys made millions and billions of dollars. So if the children that are teenagers today, continue to grow up, they're going to grow up in a world where they were told that the billionaires and the millionaires led to the pandemic and all that kind of shit. And, those guys made so much money and they stole it all from you and all that horse shit. And I'm thinking we're probably going to go harder into socialism before, it gets better, because they just have better PR. It just is what it is, man. People don't want to hear freedom will fix things. They want to hear that, the government will take care of it or somebody else will take care of it. And as we continue to lionize activists and turn activists into heroes and let them make hundreds of millions of dollars and all that kind of shit, we're going to get more activists and people that respond to incentives. All right, so Black Saiyan 97. Who are some of your favorite comic book villains? Big fan of Doctor Doom. I think Doctor Doom, they've been doing too much and trying to make Doctor Doom not just a good guy, but a respectable piece of the Marvel citizenry. It's like, no, he's a megalomaniacal tyrant. That's what he is. That's what he should be. I think it's kind of corny to like the Joker, but I do like the Joker. I think that the Joker, when used properly, is a good villain. He's a symbol of chaos. If you use him properly, he's a good villain. I think Mr. Freeze is another one. Yes, he's a little too sympathetic, but I think that if you do, Mr. Freeze properly, he's a great villain. The Penguin is another one. I think the Penguin is a really good villain. I think the Penguin in the Batman, the movie, the Robert Pattinson Batman, I think it proved that the Penguin can be pretty good and very interesting if you wanted them to be. So those are some of my favorite villains. I wish Iron Man had better villains. All right, 2. What's the worst cartoon you ever seen? Oh, Ren and Stimpy. I hate Ren and Stimpy. I hate fart humor, vomit humor, and that kind of shit. I cannot stand it. It's so gross. The art style for Ren and Stimpy is awful. I hate it. Ugh. It's nothing but like booty and boogers. It's just, I don't find that shit to be funny. Like booty humor and booger humor is not something I find to be very funny. I hate it so much. Ugh. That's about it. Like, Ren and Stimpy was quite frankly a popular show when I was a kid, but I absolutely could not stand it. I could not watch it. It was awful. 3. If Chris Benoit never did what he did, how different would WWE be today? I think they probably wouldn't have gone PG so soon. I think they wouldn't have done it in such a hard way. But I still think they would have gone PG. I think they were going to trend in that direction anyway because it appealed to Cena's base. And basically what they did was they took the blood away and they let Cena cut loose with, more cartoonish storylines. But that was about it. I think that hard change wouldn't have occurred though. Like they had that hard break with reality after what Benoit did. They didn't need that, but that was the catalyst to force them to change because they wanted to get away from that shit. I don't think they would still be doing bloodbaths on TV. I don't still think they would be doing that. I think that it's something Vince wanted to get away from anyway. As we know, Vince has been complaining about blood on TV and that kind of shit for years, and he didn't do it all the time. But the Attitude Era were the bloodier times because it seemed like it made more sense. 4. If Tomohiro Ishii ever won the IWGP Championship, what would your reaction be? Man, oh God, bro. If you're trying to blow my head off my shoulders, he would have to win the WWE Championship. And if he won the IWGP Championship, I would be like, that belt's trash anyway. Like it's whatever. Will Ospreay was the IWGP champion. Evil was the IWGP champion. I would just say, and I don't dislike Evil, by the way. I think Evil was great. I think how he got there was great. The storyline leading up to him becoming the champion was great. How him losing it wasn't great because it was stupid. They should have built it up more. But Ishii being as boring and, God. That wouldn't be a good time. That's for sure. But I wouldn't blow my stack because New Japan isn't really my thing. King Smart, push, bury, fire, kill, Omos, Satnam Singh, Commander Aziz, and Shanky Singh. All right, of these, push Omos, bury Commander Aziz, fire Shanky, kill Satnam Singh. And only because I'm not as familiar with Satnam Singh as other people. He might be the best of the bunch for all I know. But as of recording, he's a rookie who hasn't done anything. So it'd be easier to kill him off. Darren Miles, another question. How would you book Kane versus Steve Austin? Are you talking about the storyline where Kane threatened to set himself on fire if he lost? Because I definitely think he should have won that match and probably should have just won that match without the whole Undertaker chair thing. I don't think we needed that part. I get they wanted to protect Steve Austin, but Kane's a monster. He could have been able to make Austin bleed on his own without help. I get it. We wanted to try to turn Undertaker heel and all that, do the will they, won't they with him and Kane. That was at the point where I was just kind of like, all right, Steve is being booked too strong. If Kane can't beat him by himself, come on. And then he lost to him the very next night. That pissed me off so fucking bad. That was one of the things that, as far as booking decisions in the Attitude Era, really made me mad. That really pissed me off. Not just that Kane beat Steve Austin and with Undertaker's help. I still thought that was weird. I was like, man, give the guy the belt, but like that, come on. He's Kane. He's, at this point, Kane is really strong. He should be able to beat Steve Austin in a first blood match. He doesn't have to pin him. So he should have beat him in the first blood match. But then for him to fight Steve Austin the very next night and lose the title back, absolutely abysmal. Abysmal booking. You could have done so much more with that. So much more. I probably would have... would I have run Kane and Steve Austin all the way to WrestleMania? Yes. Yes, I would have. Because Kane was a strong enough character to pull that off. Kane could have destroyed guys for the next several months. And then went into WrestleMania as the champion who was wrecking guys and as the big red monster. Even beating Undertaker. I would have had him beat Undertaker at some point, probably Royal Rumble or some thereabouts. And Austin goes into to the WrestleMania to face him and beat him for the belt. I would have done that. That was a great, or at least give it a couple of months. Even if you weren't going to run it to WrestleMania, at least run it to another good point. Maybe even do the switch. I think I think The Rock won the title at Survivor Series that year too, right? So all of this was the jumbled up kind mess that gave us The Rock as the champion, which was great and probably the right thing to do. But either you don't give Kane the belt at all, which means you don't put him in the match because you're not going to have him get beat by Steve Austin. Him losing to Steve Austin is the problem, right? So if you say, hey, Mongo, we can't have Kane run to WrestleMania with the belt because then The Rock doesn't get it. All right. So then you don't put Kane in the match at all. And you don't book Austin versus Kane. You just don't do it. Because having Kane lose to Steve Austin was it for him. That was it. That killed him. And some people don't think so, but it did. It killed him. Because it separated Paul Bearer and Kane by having Paul Bearer say no, but Kane said yes to that match. It was great for Kane because it made him seem like he was capable of independent thought. And it was a decision that he made, and was probably the first decision he made on his own since he got there. But it was terrible for the character because he lost. And it was like, oh, well, he was a valiant champion. He was willing to put the title on the line and then got beat. That's no. Kane was dead right there. You get beat by a normal guy like Steve Austin. And then they did that silly triple threat match where neither Undertaker or Kane could beat Steve Austin. I'm like, oh, come on. Get the fuck out of here. If that was John Cena, you would complain. If that was Roman Reigns, you would complain. But it was Stone Cold Steve Austin, so it was okay. That's bullshit. All right, next question. Oh shit, I lost the questions. Special J. Okay, I was watching one of your videos and you said you didn't like New Day. I assume you're not the typical I'm a hard black man. Seeing as the New Day break the mold of serious face black man, why don't you like New Day? I just think that they're corny. And to me, it's boring to have hard black, Farouk style baby black man all the time. Like you need some of that every once in a while. The take no shit, no nonsense black dude, the Luke Cage of WWE. You do need that sometimes. But the bootios and the trumpets and the tubas and all that shit that they were doing, it was cool at first. But then it went on too long. And then it started doing the rainbow shit and the unicorn shit. And I was like, okay, we're doing too much. It was just too much. Like there's still some fun elements to New Day that I find them to be fun. But twerk videos, the gyrating, I don't really like that stuff. I still do like some of the New Day, and when they were singing, like, let's hear it for New Day, and the claps and everything. I think all that stuff is fun. But I just think that they got really corny, and it was a good look for the black youth because it gave them a different perspective. It's like anime nerds became their favorite pro wrestlers, but at the same time, they're anime nerds, and I like anime too, but I don't believe that anime nerds should be like the heroes for the youth. I just don't think so. I've been to a few anime conventions and they're degenerates, so so I wouldn't go into that. All right, WG Phil, Lispers Anonymous Part 2. Cody has since left for WWE, so it's Keith and Andrade cornering Kenny and Khan about their booking. Guest appearance from Elmer Hager and Tony as the counselor. All right, let's see here. Welcome, everyone. It is the greatest day in the history of our sport. We're here once again for Lispers Anonymous. I am your host, Tony Schiavone, and we're going to do roll call. Roll call. Keith Lee, present. Andrade El Idolo. Look at me. Look at me. Mr. Cody Rhodes. Cody Rhodes. Are you here, Cody Rhodes? Mr. Tony Schiavone, I think it is pretty apparent that Mr. Cody Rhodes is not present. I am looking around and I do not see his stoned visage. Cody, Mr. El Idolo, have you seen Cody Rhodes recently? Cody, I think I see Cody on TV. I think I saw Cody on TV. we did WrestleMania. Yeah, WrestleMania. The grandfather of them all, you say. Is Cody Rhodes present? Mr. Tony Schiavone, what do you know of this Cody Rhodes going to WrestleMania? I know nothing of the sort. I don't even watch wrestling. I watch baseball and titties. Tony Khan. Cody is he's a high value free agent, and I think he left to go to WWE, and he sought greener pastures. And wait a minute, Mr. Khan. Cody Rhodes left to go to WWE. They're going to change him. That's Cody's problem. Mr. Andrade El Idolo. Do you feel that Cody Rhodes going to WWE is a smart decision? How do you know? I don't know. It's Cody. It's about business. He's a businessman. Yes, you are correct. Cody Rhodes is a businessman. He is all about the business. That is absolutely true. And it is in his blood as the son of Dusty Rhodes. So it makes sense that Cody Rhodes would go chase a dream. A dream. Yes, he truly is a dreamer. Keith Lee, could you please stop dominating the conversation? Can we continue with the roll call, please? Jake Hager, are you present? Jake Hager! Hager, are you present? I'm over here. I am over here. A little late. I was busy appreciating Chris Jericho. He's a wrestling god. He is a wizard. Did you notice that Chris Jericho is a wizard? I saw his hat. Chris Jericho is a wizard now. Much have changed in the last week. Oh, we have Cody Rhodes going back to WWE. Chris Jericho has transformed himself into a wizard. Everything's changing. But that shouldn't be. Things should never grow. Things should never change. You should never let people change you, sir. Mr. Hager, why are you dressed this way? Why are you dressing like Chris Jericho? You shouldn't do that, sir. You are an MMA badass. You should fight and stand up for Keith. I understand, but Chris is the reason I have a job. Tony. Elmer Hager. I'm sorry. Jake Hager. Jake Hager, I'm sorry. I'm completely and totally sorry. But we must continue with the roll call. Pete Dunne. Is that the name here? Pete Dunne? Pete Dunne? I heard that Mr. Dunne only responds to the name Butch now. So perhaps if you try the name Butch, he will say present. I think I see his face over in the corner. Mr. Schiavone, take over if you please. Butch. Oi! My pal Butch, he disappeared. I can't find Butch. I was looking for all over for him. Have you seen him? I put up posters. I was all over the place. I looked at my pal Butch. Have you seen Butch? Mr. Sheamus, where have you come from? You know where I came from. I came from Ireland. I came all the way from Ireland. I walked across the ocean barefoot, looking for my pal Butch. You see my little hat? See my little jacket? I was looking for Butch. Where's Butch? I can't find Butch anywhere. I don't think I'm going to be able to get through this one because I don't know how to conclude the Sheamus Keith Lee conversation about Butch. And I'm too silly to be able to get through this shit, man. Oh man, it's fun trying to do these scenarios, but it's killing me because I can't get through this shit at all. All right, so he's got wrestling questions. He says, all right, this is from WG Phil. He says, what do you think of the legacy of the OVW for Cena, Orton, Batista, and Lesnar? And how do you think the 2.0 guys like Bryan, Hayes, Waller, and D'Angelo could have the same success, or you have your own big four of main events from 2.0? I think that the legacy of OVW, the OVW4, is that WWE was looking to replace Austin and Rock, who were, look, they weren't aging, but Austin was pretty much on his way out. And they knew The Rock was on his way out too. And they were looking to go back to to mix the two eras. This is the good thing about the Ruthless Aggression era. And it was like, it had pieces of that Hogan-esque era where you had the big muscular hero, the Batistas, the Brock. And then you also had your Randy Savage, like smaller, but highly proficient, Kurt Angles and Shawn Michaels, those guys had come back. And it was a mixture of those two. But they were looking to replace Hogan and Rock, not Hogan and Rock, but Hogan, Rock, Austin, all those guys were getting older. So it was time for a new set of guys to come in. And WWE just has to be open to that in order for it to actually occur. Too often, guys come in, they come in at the wrong time. They come in a little too young, or they peak at the wrong times. Like, Lashley and Cody came in at around the same time. I think they may be a year apart or something like that. Like Cody came in like 2007 and Lashley was in 2006. Lashley's a little bit older than Cody. I'm thinking about 10 years older than Cody. But, those guys came in at the time where they was pushing, Cena and Orton, and they couldn't get in. There was no foothold to get in. And then when the Shield came in, there was a bunch of guys who were right on the cusp of WWE. I think Cody was one of those guys too. And he just couldn't get in. So WWE, if the way for Braun and Tony D'Angelo and all those guys to be able to make it is going to be a time where Vince has to say, Roman is done, Randy is done, Drew is done, Lashley's done. All those guys are finished. We're looking for new top guys. If that's going to be his attitude, and if that we're looking for new top guys, then it should be fairly easy for them to get into those top spots after a year or two of, toiling in some baby's first gimmick or whatever the fuck that's going to be, right? But it all depends on whether WWE is really ready to move their top guys that they currently have out of the way. And they're almost never ready to do that. Like, I remember Ricky Steamboat was talking about this, like, when he came back to WWE, I think when he started doing the Dragon Spit thing, that he was told, once the main event spot opens up, you're going to get in it. Because they were still doing Hogan and shit. They were still doing all that. And he was waiting for them to spiral out of that stuff. And it never happened. So it's like, you can't be a main event guy until they're ready to move their main event guys out of the way. So, that was a Kurt Hennig problem too. He peaked at the wrong time. He came in during the era of Hogan. If Kurt Hennig had lasted and not gone so hard and would have peaked in 94, he would have been up there at the top with Bret. He probably would have been trading the title with Bret. If he'd have peaked in 94 and not 1989 or 1990, So it's all about whether Vince is going to be ready and sees his top guys as sort of losing steam. So I would keep Braun Breaker off the main roster until Roman is already beat. I wouldn't have Bryan beat him. That's a super push, and people are going to regurgitate that. I would wait for Roman to lose, whoever the next guy is going to be. Probably going to be Cody or Drew McIntyre or somebody like that. And then I would bring in Braun right underneath all of that stuff going on. Because now everybody's looking at this shiny new thing over here, and you can build up Braun Breaker in the shadows. Instead of putting so much intense spotlight on those guys. Because those, the Lesnar was the only one that really got a super intense spotlight at first. Cena had to toil. Orton had to toil a little bit before he found Evolution. And Batista had to do the Deacon Batista thing for a little while. So you definitely got to have your guys struggle and strife and have baby's first gimmick and fall and look silly and look stupid and earn their spot. So you need to have something else going on at the top in order to get that together. So it's all to be about whether there's opportunities there. His second question. If you were Tony, who are the top 2-3 wrestlers you'd have to break the bank to keep to avoid them taking their gimmicks and to be put in the top spot like Cody? MJF is number one. That's the one guy you definitely need to crack open the bank account to keep. And he might be the only one. He literally might be the only one. Because Darby has already pretty much boxed himself in AEW that he doesn't like WWE. And he's basically a ride or die AEW guy. So you're probably not going to need to break the bank for him. Jungle Boy, he's small. Vince is going to see how small he is and probably be like, Sammy Guevara probably has no chance in WWE. He's skinny. He's got no body. He has no real personality. So if of the four pillars, probably MJF is the only one I would really like shatter the bank to keep, because he's the one who's perfect for that brand. The other three are just possible opponents for him, And plus, you would, of course, have to gauge whether WWE would really be interested in them or not. And I would see that, especially if they're an undersized guy, WWE is probably not going to be that interested. But the other top guys, as far as the Moxleys, the Danielsons, the Punks, you probably want to keep John. You probably want to keep Moxley because, he was one of the first guys who jumped ship. And you don't want to start the trend of Cody was one of the guys who jumped over, and now Moxley's going to jump. That's a problem. But I don't see Moxley going back. I know a lot of people think he will because he's friends with Seth and Roman. It's like, as long as the same power structure is in place, I don't see Moxley going back. Same thing with Punk. As long as the same power structure is in place, I don't see those two guys going back. And the benefit of AEW is that guys are willing to say, I hate WWE or I don't like that system so much, I'm willing to take less money to stay here. And that's the one benefit Tony Khan is going to have. Guys who are going to be angling for more money, it might be a guy like Chris Jericho. He might be one of the guys you might have to let get away because Jericho's going to be angling for more money. He's comfortable with the WWE system. He's going to make a lot of fucking money because he owns his own theme song, by the way. So he could always take everything that he's doing in AEW and go to WWE with it and say, Vince, I want to do Judas. I want to do the Painmaker. I want to do the Wizard. I want to do all of that shit. I want to have my own stable. I want to finish my career in WWE. Here's what I want. And Vince will be like, sure, whatever. I don't have to pay anybody extra for the theme song or anything like that. Sure, whatever. And that's that. But Moxley and Punk, they're so anti-WWE, at least from the system perspective, with the scripted promos and the camera cuts and the Kevin Dunn and all that shit. They're not going to want to be bothered. I would definitely keep my eye on Danielson though, because I don't think Danielson I think he's working at AEW for the possibility of working with a bunch of other people, but I think I think him and Jericho are going to go back eventually. I think they're going to finish up in AEW, and then once they see that they're not really, going to be tippy top guys anymore, they're probably going to go back. Darren Miles, what do people mean when they say you have no personality? What they're saying is you have no sense of humor. You're not funny. You're not quippy. You're not witty. Everybody has a personality. Some people just have a serious personality, but some people think you're just not fun enough, not outgoing enough. You're not funny enough. You're not personable. That's what they mean by you don't have a personality. Goober316 with the last video. Sorry if this was asked before, but what are your top 5 favorite wrestlers and also top 5 favorite superheroes? All right, my top 5 favorite wrestlers are Randy Savage, Shawn Michaels, Bret the Hitman Hart, The Undertaker, and usually I'll say Mr. Perfect or The Ultimate Warriors. That number 5 will change depending on what I'm watching. But those top 4 are usually my favorites as far as I will watch pretty much anything with them in it. So really, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, and Randy Savage, and Ric Flair. Ric Flair is another one that I really love a lot. So it'd be Ric Flair or Mr. Perfect and somebody like that. But I'm also huge on the Road Warriors. I love those guys too. So number 5 would be hard for me to choose. 5 favorite superheroes: Daredevil. I love Daredevil. Daredevil is probably number 1. The Punisher is huge. Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Captain America. Captain America for a long time was one of my favorite superheroes. They've been doing him dirty in recent years in the comic books. But Daredevil, they've been doing him dirty too, but he's still doing good. They do Spider-Man dirty almost all the time. All 5 of the heroes that I mentioned, they fuck over him all the time in Marvel. And they've been getting fucked over a lot lately within the last 5 to 10 years as far as being killed off or replaced or whatever. So that's it. That's the list. We got there, y'all, in about 90 minutes. All right. Thank you guys for listening. Like, share, subscribe. and I'll talk to you guys later.